In the Gospel reading, someone asked Jesus one of those big questions: will there be only a few saved? They were wondering whether many or only a few will find communion with the Lord in the afterlife. As often happens in the Gospel, when people ask Jesus a question, he does not answer the question directly. He did not say, yes, only a few will be saved, or no, many will be saved. Rather than focus on the few or the many, Jesus focused on the person who was asking him the question. Rather than speculate about the future, Jesus focused on the present, here and now. He turned to the one asking the question and said, try your best to enter by the narrow door. Jesus seems to be saying the questioner that the way to the salvation he was asking about requires going through a narrow door, here and now. Jesus' reference to the narrow door is clearly an image. He is not talking about an actual narrow door that can be found somewhere. In some of the old grand houses with the plenty of land, you sometimes come across a walled garden where flowers and plants could grow in a sheltered environment, protected from the worst of the elements. There is generally a narrow enough gate or door into those walled gardens. To get into that garden, you have to search for the small opening in the wall. You can't just enter into the garden with your eyes closed. You have to make an effort to be focused and attentive. The narrow door often leads into an open and a beautiful space. To enjoy the space, you have to discover the narrow door and get yourself through it. In calling on people to strive to enter by the narrow door, Jesus is suggesting that the path that leads to salvation, to the garden life with God, requires effort and focus, a certain concentration on our part. In John's Gospel, Jesus says that He is the door. He identifies the narrow door with Himself. To enter the narrow door is to enter through Him. It is to take the path that He Himself has taken, to walk in the way He walked, to live as He lived, to love as He loved us. This requires a certain focus on our part, a striving to keep saying yes to the narrow door, a yes to the Lord's ways, and saying to no to other ways. It will often involve a struggle, and along the way, we will fail many times and have to start again. Every day we keep on trying to enter by that narrow door. After striving to enter by the narrow door, we might be inclined to think that his implicit answer to the question, will there be only a few saved, was yes, only a few will be saved. Not many will get through this narrow door. Yet the reminder of the gospel reading seems to suggest ourselves. Jesus goes on to speak of the communion with God, life in the God's kingdom, not in terms of a beautiful walled garden, but in terms of a great banquet, the feast in the kingdom of God. Who is present at this feast? Is it only a few? Far from it, Jesus paints a picture of a great feast with an enormous number of guests. as well as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the prophets, there are people from the east and west, north and south. The first reading from the Isaiah speaks of the Lord gathering the nations of every language. Jesus' vision of final salvation, what we call heaven, is of a very large and mixed gathering. It seems that a great many people are somehow getting through that narrow door. Those do not present at the final banquet seems to be those who had absolutely no doubt that they would present, who says, "We once ate and drank in your company, you taught in our streets." They took it for granted they would be there without having to enter by any narrow door. Perhaps the real focus of Jesus' words in today's gospel are those who take for granted and all is well with them. We can never underestimate what Paul calls the length and breadth and depth and height of God's love. But we cannot take it for granted. With the Lord's help, we have to keep entering through that narrow door. Every day, we try to respond to Lord's call and to enter through Him, to take His path of self-emptying love. God has always patiently extended His loving hands toward us, to reach out to us and embrace us. And it is really now up to us to accept His generous and compassionate mercy. And it is up to us to make a commitment to follow Him.